Hello and welcome to my podcast. I'm Alden Carrow, author of Cornwall in verse, tied to touring poetry. This show is about slowing down, listening closely, and discovering the poetry that lives in both the extraordinary and the everyday. Each episode, I begin with a guest poem, something from the wider world of poetry that has inspired me or continues to resonate. Then I'll invite you, the listeners, to suggest future guest poems, and after that, I'll share one of my own pieces too. Today we're exploring the theme of sacredness of place. Not necessarily religious sacredness, though that can shimmer beneath the surface, but the kind of sacredness that arises when a landscape asserts itself upon the human spirit. It's about how a place becomes a force, how geography becomes revelation. When we look at the English language canon, few poems capture the raw, untamed holiness of a specific landscape, quite like Gerard Manley Hopkins' Inversnaid. I chose this poem because it's not about nostalgia or escape, it's about awe. Hopkins stands before a Scottish burn, a rushing stream, and allows its wildness to overwhelm him. The poem is a hymn to the ungoverned, the unpolished, the unspoiled. It is the perfect entry point for our discussion today, because it reminds us that sacredness is not always serene. Sometimes it is fierce. Sometimes it's the shock of encountering nature in its purest, least domesticated form. Gerard Manley Hopkins, a Jesuit priest and one of the most innovative poets of the 19th century, devoted his work to capturing the divine energy he perceived in the natural world. Inversnaid is one of his most vivid landscape poems, set along the banks of Loch Lomond in Scotland. Hopkins' language is muscular, sprung, alive. He invents words, bends syntax and pushes English to its limits in order to convey the vitality of the place. What makes this poem so resonant for our theme is its insistence that sacredness is found not in manicured beauty but in wilderness. Hopkins does not describe a gentle stream, he describes a torrent. He doesn't offer pastoral calm, he offers elemental force. The poem asks us to consider what is lost when landscapes are tamed, drained or controlled. As I read this, I invite you to imagine a place whose wildness has moved you, a place that felt ancient, untouchable, or spiritually charged simply because it refused to be subdued. This darksome burn, horseback brown, his roll-rock high road roaring down, in coop and in cone the fleece of his foam flutes and load to the lake falls a home. A wind-puff bonnet of fawn froth turns and twindles over the broth of a pool so pitch-black, fell frowning, it rounds and rounds, despair to drowning. Decked with dew, dappled with dew, are the groins of the braes that the brook treads through. Wiry heath-packs, flitches of fern, and the bead-bonny ash that sits over the burn. What would the world be once bereft of wet and wilderness? Let them be left, oh let them be left, wildness and wet. Long live the weeds and the wilderness yet. What I find extraordinary about this poem is its intensity. Hopkins does not merely observe the landscape, he wrestles with it. The opening line, this darksome burn, horseback brown, plunges us immediately into motion, colour and texture. The stream is not a gentle ribbon of water, it is a creature, a force, a presence. Hopkins invented compounds, roll rock, wind-puff bonnet, bead bonny, mimic the tumbling energy of the burn itself. Language becomes landscape. In the context of our theme, the sacredness of place, the poem's final stanza is the heart of its message, Hopkins asks, what would the world be once bereft of wet and wildness? This is not a rhetorical flourish, it's definitely a plea. The sacredness here lies in the untamed. The burn is not a sanctuary of peace, but a sanctuary of authenticity. It is a reminder that the world's holiness is often found in what resists control. The poem also gestures towards a spiritual ecology. Hopkins, as a Jesuit, believed that God's presence was immanent in the natural world. But even without that theological frame, the poem insists that wild places matter, not just aesthetically, but existentially. They keep us honest, they keep us awake, they keep us connected to something older and larger than ourselves. Where Yeats's Innisfree offers a constructed refuge, Hopkins' Inversnaid offers a raw encounter. One is a sanctuary built, the other is a sanctuary discovered. Both are sacred, but in different ways. Hopkins teaches us that sacredness can be turbulent, muddy, roaring and alive. It can be found in the weeds and the wilderness, in the places that refuse to be tidied into metaphor. This is what we seek when we write poetry about place, not just to describe a landscape, but to honour the force it exerts upon us. To capture the moment when the world in all its wildness rounds and rounds despair to drowning, and yet somehow manages to restore us. Moving on from Loch Lomond in Scotland, I want to take you to a place that holds a similar, albeit stonier resonance for me. My poem for this episode is titled Altarnun. While much of my work focuses on North Yorkshire, the moors of the north, I have a deep and abiding love for the rugged interior of Cornwall. Altarnun is a village on the northeast edge of Bodmin Moor. It is often called the Cathedral of the Moors because of its impressive church, the Church of St. Nonna. I chose this piece to follow Hopkins because it deals with a similar intersection of nature and spirit. But where Hopkins finds softness and violence, Altarnun offers granite, rain and a sense of endurance. The sacredness here feels ancient, pre-human almost, carved out of the rock. This poem attempts to capture the weight of that history, the way the village seems to have grown out of the moorland itself rather than being built upon it. It explores how architecture, the church, the cottages, can become part of the natural sacredness of a landscape. Before I read Altarnun, I'd like to set the scene. Imagine a landscape that is vast, open and wind-scoured. Bodmin Moor is not a gentle place, it is a place of wild ponies, granite tours and sudden mists. Tucked into a valley sheltered slightly from the prevailing winds lies the village. The dominant feature of the village is the stone. Everything is grey granite, the bridge, the walls, the church tower. It gives the impression of immense solidity. When you stand there by the stream that runs through the village, you feel the passage of time differently. It's not the fleeting time of the city, it's geological time. The church tower has watched the sky for centuries. The carved old saints mentioned in the poem refers to the intricate stonework that has weathered storms for hundreds of years. This poem is my attempt to listen to what those stones are saying. It's a tribute to the quiet dignity of a place that stands firm while the world changes around it. It's about the hush that falls over you when you enter a place where generations have prayed, lived and died. Stone by stone the village stands, where moorland breath meets chapel hands. A stream runs soft through granite grace, time lingers in this sacred place. The church of St. Nonna guards the lane, with carved old saints in wind and rain. Its tower watches sheep and sky, as centuries drift slowly by. Thatched roofs lean with whispered lore of Bodmin tales and tin once bore. The hedgerows hum with dusk and dew, and lanes remember all they knew. Altarnun dreams in quiet light, where stars hang low and fields turn white. A place where silence speaks in rhyme, and every stone recalls its time. In analysing Altarnun, we can see the immediate juxtaposition in the first stanza. Moorland breath meets chapel hands. This is the crux of the poem, the meeting point between the wild, untamable nature of the moor and the structured, intentional faith of the builders. The breath of the moor is the wind, the mist, the atmosphere. The hands are the human effort to create order and sanctify in the wilderness. By saying time lingers, I wanted to convey a sticky, slow quality of time. In these sacred places, the past is not gone, it is present in the architecture. The second stanza focuses on the witness of the church. The tower watches sheep and sky. There is a humility in this. The cathedral of the moors does not watch kings and armies. It watches the simple agricultural life and the changing weather. This grounds the sacredness in the everyday. It suggests that the divine is found in the rain and the flock, not just the altar. Moving to the third stanza, thatched roofs lean with whispered lore. Here we touch upon memory. A place becomes sacred through the stories told there. The reference to the tin once bore acknowledges Cornwall's industrial past, the hard labour of the miners. Sacred is not just about pretty views, it is about honouring the struggle of those who came before. The hedgerows and lanes are personified, they remember. This is a key concept in my writing, the idea that the land itself holds memory. Finally, the poem concludes with silence speaks in rhyme. This brings us back to poetry. In a place of true quiet, like Altarnun at night, the silence is not empty. It has a rhythm, a cadence, it communicates. The stones recalling their time serves as a reminder of our own transience. We are just passing through, but the village, the moor and the stone remain. This endurance is what makes the place feel holy. It puts our small worries into perspective against the backdrop of centuries. In the spirit of creating things that endure, like the stone village of Altarnun or the immortal lines of Hopkins, I want to pivot to a very practical aspect of the creative life, the actual production of a book. Specifically, I want to talk about self-publishing through Ingram Spark. For a long time there was a stigma attached to self-publishing, a notion that it was a vanity project for those who couldn't gatekeep their way into traditional publishing houses. But that world is gone. Today, independent publishing is about autonomy, quality and legacy. If you are a poet, you are an architect of words. Why shouldn't you also be the architect of the vessel that holds them? I use Ingram Spark for my work, and I want to share why and how it relates to this idea of sacred space for your art. When you write a poem, you control the line breaks, the rhythm, the breath. When you hand that over to a publisher, you often lose control of the presentation, the paper, texture, the cover art, the font. Ingram Spark is a platform that allows independent authors to distribute hardcover and paperback books globally to 40,000 retailers, including libraries and independent bookstores. It's the engine room behind many books you see on shelves, but using it is a craft in itself. It requires you to step out of the role of the dreamer and into the role of the project manager. The first hurdle is the file preparation. This is where many poets stumble. A Word document is not a book. You need to understand the interior layout, the typesetting. Just as we analyse the structure of a stanza, you must analyse the structure of a page. Margins matter. In poetry, where white space is silence, If your margins are too tight, you suffocate the poem. If you gutter the inner margin, it is too small. The reader has to break the spine to read the ends of your lines. Ingram Spark demands print-ready PDFs, which means you need to learn about bleed, trim size and embedded fonts. This learning curve can be steep, but it is deeply rewarding. It forces you to treat your work with professional respect. Then there is the cover. On Ingram Spark, you have the option of matte or glossy, hardback with a dust jacket or case laminate. For poetry, I almost always recommend matte. It feels tactile, soft, organic, like the moss on the stones of Altarnun. It invites the hand. A glossy cover screams commercial fiction or textbook. You want your book to feel like an artifact. One of the most significant advantages of Ingram Spark is the distribution network. Unlike Amazon KDP, which is excellent but somewhat of a walled garden, Ingram sends your metadata out to the wider world. This means a local bookshop in a village you've never visited can order your book for their shelf. There is a specific kind of magic in knowing that your sacred place, your collection of poems, can physically travel to places you cannot. However, it is not without its challenges. The interface can be utilitarian, and customer service is not always instantaneous. You have to pay for setup and revisions, which acts as a quality filter. It stops you from uploading a draft you only upload when it is perfect. This cost makes you pause. It makes you proofread one last time. It adds weight to the process. For poets, the ability to print on demand is a miracle. We don't need to fill a garage with 5,000 copies. We can print 1 or 10 or 100. This sustainability aligns with the themes of nature we often write about. We are not wasting paper. We are producing exactly what is needed. So, if you're sitting on a manuscript, terrified of the rejection slips from the big publishers, I encourage you to look at Ingram Spark. View the publishing process not as a bureaucratic hurdle, but as the final stanza of your creative act. You're building the house for your poems. You are choosing the stone, the timber, the windows. When you finally hold that book with its ISBN and its professional binding, you realise that you haven't just written poetry, you have made a physical object that will outlast you. You've carved your own stone in the village of literature. So now you've listened to one of my poems and the value of self-publishing using Ingram Spark, I'd love to hear from you. If there's a poem you'd like me to feature as a guest poem in a future episode, please email me at aldencarrow78@gmail.com. That's aldencarrow78@gmail.com. It could be a classic, something modern, or even a personal favourite that means a lot to you. This way, the podcast becomes a shared journey. So thank you for joining me on this journey. Until next time, may you find the poetry in the everyday, and I look forward to speaking to you again on Wednesday.